Hello, it's Jack Klugh, producer of the Veterans in Your Corner podcast. Thank you for joining us on the second episode. On today's podcast, Chaplain Jack Klugh interviews Bruce Krogstad of the 133rd Air National Guard out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I know that you're going to enjoy this podcast. Bruce has a very interesting perspective, having joined the military later on in life and having multiple deployments overseas. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. That's enough for me. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And here's Chaplain Klugh.
So something in Bruce Krogstad's story really changed.
And compassion sometimes is a victim of deploying into nasty places. There is life, not just in the hereafter, but right here, right now.
Well, today we're going to interview a friend of mine, Bruce Krogstad. Or is it Krogstad?
Krogstad.
My apologies. Okay, I've been butchering your name for years. Who else's name have I butchered? Oh, I was down in Oklahoma with a friend of mine. I've known him for 30 years, and I've been calling him Ricky. So I'm listening to him preach in his home church, and he says, "Jack, my name is Rick, not Ricky." And I go, "Oh." So I had to apologize for 30 years of insulting him.
That's okay, Dr. Klugh.
Right. Right. Well, what we want to do, Bruce, is just talk about your military experience. And so I've got a list of questions here. You've seen them. Mm-hmm. And so why don't we just start off by telling us, tell your name, who you are, what you did. Just open it up, and then I'll look at these questions, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Bruce Krogstad. I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota. My father was in the Army Air Corps. He was ended his career, started enlisted, ended as a first lieutenant, was commander of a remote base and a meteorologist. He stayed stateside the entire war, spending most of the time in Texas. As a kid, I grew up looking at his randomly scattered World War II paraphernalia, and he had one of these big leather bomber jackets with a shearling collar on it, and I wore that out by the time I graduated from high school. And he didn't speak much about his experiences in the war, but I was nonetheless proud of his service.
Where did you find it? Did he have it in a box or on the wall or what?
Randomly scattered throughout the house.
Okay, like in a drawer or something?
Yeah, just all over the place.
Yeah.
It was never important for him to display his medals.
Okay.
And
Okay.
So when the opportunity came for me to join the Guard, the Air Guard.
Now tell people, Bruce, you and I know. But what is Air Guard? What is reserves? What is active duty?
Oh, okay. The Air Guard, you might say I was a reservist. But Air Force Reserves has only a federal mission, whereas Air Guard has a state mission as well. In other words, we have two commanders-in-chief in the Air Guard, or the Army Guard for that matter. The governor of the state, and then the president of the United States. So that's why we're involved in flood relief, disaster response. The reserve forces.
So you're going to get your marching orders generally from the governor of North Dakota,
or as need be,
from the president,
as the need arises, as it did after 9/11, from the president.
Well, before we get into any of that, tell me, when did you become a first lieutenant?
I was commissioned in 1998.
What was going on in the world in 1998, and what was your thinking about? Hey, I want to do this.
Yeah,
because you already had a job,
right? I think for many years I wanted to join the military, specifically the Air Force, but in parish ministry, my Sundays were committed. So taking off one out of every 4 Sundays for drill weekend just wasn't a possibility.
And for those that don't know, you pastor a church full-time or part-time? What is that?
Right now?
Yeah. Well, what back then and
back
even
then.
now?
Yeah. I was in campus ministry at the time. So we had no Sunday obligations because the campus emptied out on weekends.
Okay.
And so that provided the opportunity for me to pursue the military.
Sure.
So I interviewed with the 133rd Airlift Wing out of Minneapolis. It's a C-130, a cargo aircraft unit, and was commissioned about 2 months before my 40th birthday.
Wow.
And so I nearly didn't make the cutoff.
Right.
So I was an old man by the time I joined.
So where did you go to OBC? Officer Basic Course.
Yeah, Montgomery, Alabama.
Okay. And how long was that?
1 month for the officer training, and then 1 month for chaplaincy school.
So you were going in to be an Air Force Reserve or Air National Guard chaplain.
Right. So
Wow.
it's all the training for active duty Air Force throughout one's career is the same in the Air Guard as active duty Air Force. So
What was going on socially or politically back in 90? You said 95?
98.
90, back in 98. What was going on around, do you remember?
Clinton was president at that time. The world was in a state of relative peace. We had Somalia, which was, of course, a difficult time. But other than that,
So unpack that. Just take a couple minutes. Somalia. Where's people? A lot of people today wouldn't know what that was.
Somalia, if anyone's seen the movie Black Hawk Down, that was about American involvement in Somalia, in which a number of our special forces were ambushed and killed and then rescued. It's quite a story and a great movie. But otherwise, the country was in a relative state of peace at that time. But within 3 years of my being commissioned, of course, we had 9/11, and things changed dramatically.
I remember that day. I remember where I was. But before we go there, you went to OBC. When I was in the Air Force back in the 70s and the Army in the 90s, 80s and 90s. I'm going to say a name, and you tell me if it rings a bell with you. What does it mean to be a rainbow?
I do not know.
Okay. A rainbow, when I got off the bus at Lackland Air Force Base in 1975, they would only address us as rainbows. In other words, we were civilians, and everybody had different colored clothes.
Oh.
Yeah, they were making fun of us for crying out loud. And here I signed up for this. So what was it like for you to be wearing a military uniform, first lieutenant rank?
Immediately upon being commissioned?
How did that play in your head, and how did it make you feel?
Well, I'd have to say that my commissioning, except for my wedding day, was perhaps the most significant event in my life. My father pinned his first lieutenant bars on me
Wow.
when I was commissioned. I was commissioned 45 years after he got out of the Air Force.
Wow. Yeah.
So I came on at the same rank as my father left. And that was very significant. So that tradition, I think, gave it a depth and a meaning that it may not for other people. So it kind of carrying on of the family tradition of serving. My dad and all my uncles, in fact, my mom and her sister even, so all my uncles and aunts were involved in World War II.
Wearing the uniform?
My aunts and two uncles not, but they were all involved in the Manhattan Project.
Oh yes.
So,
yes,
the development of the atomic bomb.
Yeah. Wow, Bruce.
So the whole family was, we're talking
Rambo.
10 different individuals.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I didn't know. I've known you for a long time, and I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. How did you tell your family and friends that you were going to do this, and what was some of their reactions?
My dad was very supportive. He had never tried to talk me into joining the military. That never came up. But he was pleased and I think proud that I was going to do that. My wife, not so much. It took about a year of lobbying for her to become supportive.
Okay.
She grew up in a family that had 3 other boys that could have been subject to the draft in Vietnam. So her parents, while very much patriotic, the military maybe not quite so much, and also just a concern for safety. She had a dream of my being shot, and when I first told her, and so it took persuasive multiple, requests before
Okay.
she finally reluctantly signed off.
Okay.
However, that her attitude changed 180, especially after 9/11. She knew that we needed military personnel, and she knew I had, a calling, a divine calling, to be a chaplain. And so when the opportunity came for me to sign up on the volunteer list, and the Air Guard chaplains, it's a privilege to deploy. No one is told to deploy. It's only volunteers, and it's competitive. So I got my name on the volunteer list with her support, and my first deployment was in 2002, and she was very supportive of that.
So let's slow down a little bit. You're working at the church. Did you have any other job at the time?
Campus ministry.
Campus ministry.
Yeah.
How did you basically take the church and the campus ministry and put it on pause for a while so that you could go do this? Color that picture in.
The military has expectations that employers of any kind need to be supportive of individuals that are called to active duty for reservists overall. And so I did not ask my supervisor, my board. I just told them I was going. Then, if they wanted to can me, they could. They chose, thankfully, not to. And also, my first deployment was in the summertime, which in campus ministry is downtime. So I really didn't miss much, probably about a couple months. So it worked out well.
Okay. So 9/11 hits. By the way, where do you remember you were on that day?
I remember very clearly. I was at pastor's retreat, a pastor's conference outside of Detroit Lakes at a resort, and I heard a commotion in the basement where the TV was in our meeting area, and then saw the attack.
Okay.
And I knew my life would not be the same after that.
Right. When you'd been in a little while, did anything in the early, I'm thinking of clumsy, when you get a new job, you don't know the ropes. Up to that point, the competition was to get the job. Now you've got the job. Was there any time early in your military career that you felt clumsy?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Before I went to commissioned officers training, I wore the uniform. I did ministry at the base.
Okay.
I had been given some, introduction to customs and courtesies.
Military customs and courtesies.
Right. But I was always apprehensive that I'd do or say the wrong thing and not only get myself in trouble, but my supervisor and the entire team.
Right.
When a chaplain screws up, it reflects badly on everyone.
Right.
So I was kind of walking on eggshells. And so I was very grateful for the month of commissioned officers training.
Do you remember in those early months any particular NCOs or anybody that was looking out for you?
My supervising chaplain certainly did. Yeah.
Okay. So let me look at another question. I want to get into the 9/11, but I want us to understand, to be a part of that, a lot of stuff happened in your life before that happened. What did you imagine joining the military would be like?
I really didn't have any preconceptions of that. I was expecting that it would likely be limited to drill weekends.
Okay.
2 weeks of annual training someplace. But I always knew in the back of my mind that the possibility of being deployed could occur, and I was fine with that. Of course, 9/11 took us all by surprise.
Yeah. So where were you when, let's go to that now. Where were you and how did you see it? How did you feel about it?
Yeah, well, it was hard to believe. You see it on TV, and yet having seen the Twin Towers and been there, I thought, how could these massive buildings go down? And, well, they did. And, recognize that our country was under attack, and that this was kind of my generation's Pearl Harbor.
Exactly.
Really.
Yeah.
And but more so, we got attacked on our own soil for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Since the early 1800s when the British did. So this was new, and it was big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What was it like the night before when you went on your first deployment? So, my point is, you're living life, you're a reservist, Air National Guard in Minnesota, and later it would be North Dakota. And so you're, doing your Monday through Friday. There's a certain ebb and flow. You have a good idea of what to expect and how you'll handle it. But now, the night before, you go on your first deployment. What was going through your mind, and what are the issues did you have to kind of how did you put your life in the boxes because you were going to go do something else? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, trying to get things set up the best one can, anticipating that I would not be present should there be, a need for a plumber, electrician. I had a list of everyone and phone numbers that my wife should need in my absence should something bad happen. And it did. We had, water infiltration in the basement.
Okay.
I think I'll let Kathy tell that story. But trying the best I could to anticipate and then to preemptively take steps to address those.
Did you have to, I know I had to, when I was going to the first Gulf War, I remember there's a lot of legal things I had to put in order.
Oh, yeah.
Wills and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Tell me what that was like. Tell everybody what it was, but then also what it was like for you to emotionally experience that.
I guess I've been comfortable with my mortality. And so to do a will was no big deal. It was much more of a big deal for my wife. For me, it was just, sign the papers, and be done with it. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, so it was just something you're going to do, something you had to do. It was the next thing to do. All right, that sounds like... So, what do you remember about how long did it take you to adapt? And we're talking now in your first deployment. You went where?
Initially to Al Salim. It's right along the Iraqi border with an inland Kuwait.
Okay.
An air base.
So I've never been there. I know a lot of people who have, but tell me, what was it like for you, and how long did it take for you to adapt to this new schedule, this new situation?
We landed in the Kuwait International Airport, and we had pretty heavy security around the aircraft. And we were told we needed to speed up the process of unloading the aircraft because it was at risk. It was a high-profile target. So that was a very rapid process. Then we were loaded onto a bus called Happy Trails, trying to go incognito. And then we had convoy security, Humvees with 30 cals and, in front of and behind the bus. And we're given, information about should the bus come under attack, you want to run at an angle, a 45-degree angle from the bus and go out about 30 yards. So kind of this drill, and, well, it had the effect of... the bus said Happy Trails. It was not a happy trail.
Nothing happy about that.
No. So we got to Al Salim probably about midnight, and the base had very good security. A berm around the entire base. A
berm of what?
Dirt.
Yep.
And then multiple layers of barbed wire and rolls really giving a person the idea it's going to be a very safe place.
Mm-hmm.
But it looked like a lunar landscape. It looked like we, landed on Mars or something. It was just, there wasn't a plant to be seen. And the bright lights shone on just dirt, and everything was tan or brown. It looked alien.
So that's the head. It looked alien. How did it feel to you? It was hot?
Even at midnight, it was probably 110 degrees.
Wow.
So you got off the bus and you're thinking, this is midnight? What's it going to be like 12 hours from now?
Mm-hmm.
And, 12 hours from then, it was in the 120s, 130s.
Wow.
So, yeah, I never got below 100, even at night.
So you were there for how long, Bruce?
I was at Al-Salim for about a month, then forward deployed with I think we had 4 C-130s that forward deployed into western Pakistan. About a 20-minute C-130 ride to the east of Kandahar.
Tell everybody what it means to be, you're deployed and now you're forward deployed. Break that down.
Typically, when you forward deploy, you're going closer to, the action, to where the conflict is. And that certainly was the case in Pakistan. Al-Qaeda, by this time, we'd chased the Taliban and Al-Qaeda into Pakistan, the forces had. That was the mission of our aircraft in the deployment immediately prior to when I went. Our aircraft were used for transporting especially Rangers, airborne, special operators around the stands, the Pakistan and the other countries in that general area, so they could, take on Al-Qaeda and the Taliban.
So what was your role in that, Bruce? You're there as a chaplain. Are you still a first lieutenant at that time? Did you get a promotion?
I'm a captain.
By that time, you got promoted.
Yeah.
And what was your mission as the chaplain when providing support to that effort?
Of course, the primary thing is to make sure that individuals who do not have access to practice their religion, that I provide those opportunities for whatever religious persuasion that they have.
Now your background is Lutheran, so if somebody was Native American, what would your job be?
It would be to allow that individual to have time and a place to practice their faith according to the way they define it.
Yeah.
Without fear of reprisal from command.
Yeah, and so do you remember the breadth of the religious backgrounds of the airmen and the soldiers, any service personnel and civilians and contractors? Was it a broad religious background or was it pretty narrow?
I'd say compared to the Army, it was quite a bit more narrow.
Okay.
Pretty much everyone was of a Christian background, be it Protestant or Catholic. That's kind of how it's broken down.
Right.
I was a Protestant chaplain, not a Lutheran chaplain. So I would minister to all Protestants. So it's basically Protestant or Catholic.
And so these are young men, young women.
In the Guard, we were quite a bit older on average than active duty. Active duty, the average age would probably be early 20s.
Wow.
In my unit, I was probably a little older than average, but not much. So probably mid-30s to early 40s. In fact, one of our airmen had been part of the Tet Offensive.
Wow. So, 68, 69, 67, yeah.
And he came on as a first sergeant with us. So quite a diversity.
Yeah. So what would be a normal day? Let's just say somewhere in that deployment, Bruce gets up at what time, does what, and he gets to have the rest of the time. Break that down.
I try to show up for meals. Try not to miss those.
What time would they be served?
Starting probably about 5:30. Yeah. Then after breakfast,
did they deliver it to your room? Did you get it in bed, Bruce?
I would think that as as an Air Force officer that would be understood. But, I went to the mess tent just like everyone else.
And was it the reason why I'm asking is many people might be thinking of MASH, and it always looks like a small operation, but there were thousands and thousands of people. So how big was that mess tent? And how many mess tents do you think there were?
Well, the dining facility at Ali Al Salim was nice. It was a Quonset. It's a hard facility, air conditioned, TV, refrigeration, cold beverages.
Seating how many people?
You could probably fit 400 in it. Pakistan, it was 2 different tents had been cobbled together, and room for maybe 80. No air conditioning, no refrigeration. Basically, we were served MREs for 50. So it was, not. Sometimes MREs were a welcome change from what was served in the mess tent.
Now, I know what that is. What is an MRE?
Meals ready to eat.
Now, I like the food. I never complained about it. I was back in when we were given C rations back in the day with the P38 can opener. Yeah. So how did you feel about the food out of the MREs and then the mess tent?
I'd had MREs before, and I had no complaints about them. But the variety, of course, is somewhat limited. Right. And if you choose to have like a steak MRE, it's about the consistency of shoe leather. And the good thing is I like the tuna fish. Casserole, and which is kind of a Scandinavian thing to like, and I could trade those 3 for 1.
Oh, sure.
So I was able to eat the tuna fish, and
I always found the crackers to be very hard, and
everything's hard.
How did you maintain contact with family and friends? Because you were overseas for how long on that first hitch?
A little over 3 months.
Okay, so how did you maintain contact, if you did at all?
Yeah. In Ali Al Salim, I had access to a computer, so I had email access. And then we're allowed 2 15-minute phone calls per week. So, that was... I really didn't do much letter writing. And I was surprised to learn after getting back that Kathy actually printed off every email, because she said, during World War II, your family, your dad and your uncles and aunts would write, and those letters were saved. I want to make sure that there's a record, and I thought, I said, well, I don't think there's really anything I've written that is worthy of being preserved, but she begged to differ.
Oh, sure.
So,
yeah. Okay, and how many miles from home what's
about from Kuwait to be about 8,000, and quite a bit further to Pakistan.
So you get that 2 15-minute phone calls in a week. Now I'm imagining what it was like when I had to go to the NATO facility to do it, and it was many, many years before you. Where's the room? Where's the phone? You're not laying on your bed with your cell phone doing this, no. I guess. So break it down for us.
Well, I think now that some people are doing that.
Yeah, maybe so, but back then.
No. At Ali Al Salim, there was a phone tent, and you had to wait your turn.
How many people are in line? If I'm there with you, what am I seeing?
Yeah, I tried to time it during low demand, so I rarely had to wait more than 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. Pakistan, I could use a phone where we had our ops tent. So that was actually easier.
Was it electronically done, or was it a landline? How?
Yeah, I'm not sure how we communicated. I know that we could only dial DSN, in other words, military. We had to use the military. So I could not call Kathy directly. I'd call Grand Forks Air Force Base, and they'd patch me into Kathy.
And how long were you on the phone? How long they let you talk?
Just 15 minutes.
15, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I have so much I want to ask you about that, but we'll keep going. So you're over there. What was, you have some time under your belt now, and you're thinking about Minnesota or Kathy. Tell people what that was like. You know, you're over there doing something that you would have never dreamed about, and now you're doing it, and it can be scary and stressful. Did you ever long for the good old days? Do you understand what I'm trying to get across? Okay.
Yeah, without a doubt. Ali al-Salim, while it was safe, we did have security forces that were fired upon even there. Around the perimeter of the base in Pakistan, just a thin concertina wire was about it. And it was an urban base. And all the way around the base were the black Al-Qaeda flags. So we knew that our presence was, there was no welcome mat put out by the locals for us. And we're also told that anyone with a deer rifle and a scope could take any one of us out at any time, day or night. There were no secure places. There were no sandbags or bunkers. Our tents were fully exposed to this urban area. So Pakistan was much more hostile than Kuwait.
So did you miss home? Did you miss the day?
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that. Tell us about not what you wished you were doing. Maybe it's okay to say that, but the consternation that maybe you felt, or the conflict, the gut stuff.
I knew what I was missing back home. I really didn't see the color blue, a true blue that you'd see in Minnesota skies in the summer, except for when going on the C-130 between Ali al-Salim and Pakistan. There was a persistent 20,000-foot airborne sand layer. So everything from below was shades of tan and brown.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There was a lot of pollution in Pakistan. Everyone burned everything. So this constant stench of burned rubber, plastic was in the air. You wake up coughing in the middle of the night. So it was truly a foreign place, which made me very much miss home.
Oh, sure.
And everything about it. Probably the things I missed the most, besides my wife and the beauty of Minnesota summers, lakes and forests, were dogs and children. Never saw children. In Pakistan, we were not allowed off the base. None of us would have wanted to. In Kuwait, we got off base rather frequently, and it was just good to see little kids. And the dogs, of course, you would not want to pet a service dog because you could be missing an arm. These were the service dogs were not happy. 130 degree temperatures. German shepherds,
military
for security.
So we're at the halfway point at least. So tell us, how many deployments how many years total did you serve in the Air National Guard?
20.
So out of those 20 years, how many deployments did you go on?
6.
6? Wow. Just tell me what they were. Where they were, when they were.
One was, there was one actually to the Mexican border. It was part of the Guard support of the Border Patrol.
Okay.
The others were overseas under the rubric Operation Enduring Freedom, which basically, simply put, is at that time you had OEF and OIF. OIF was Operation Iraqi Freedom. I never deployed for Operation Iraqi Freedom. So under OEF, I had, Diego Garcia.
Which is what, an island?
Yeah, it's an island 2,000 miles south of the tip of India. So it's between Australia, India, Africa,
Is that in the
Thailand.
What body of water?
Indian Ocean.
Indian Ocean.
Yeah. You may have heard that in the news now. We have B-52s that are now deployed.
Have you ever heard of Johnson
Diego.
Island?
I've heard of it. I don't know where it is.
Okay, I didn't know if it was in the same area. That'll be another interview someday.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've been over there 6 times. Which one? Well, without going, let's say, what's the overall impact on Bruce Krogstad, Pastor USA?
I've said the more rigorous the deployment, the better the ministry. Diego Garcia was a cakewalk. The only danger of incoming were coconuts dropping on us. We were totally secure. I mean, no one is going to get at us there.
So psychologically, you were comfortable.
Yeah, it was a tropical island paradise is what it was. So there we just did 24/7 devotions for outgoing missions, which was close air support over Afghanistan. And then was available for, did unit visitation and was available for counseling.
Unit visitation looks like what?
We call it a ministry of wandering around, just kind of walking around and trying to engage people in their work sites.
So as a chaplain, this is part of the job.
Yeah, just getting to know people, because people probably will not seek you out unless there's some established relationship. So that's the purpose of unit visitation.
As we're talking, does any particular encounter come to your mind?
Yeah, I was counseling with somebody many, many times, and was CIS. How would you describe that? I'm not sure what the acronym stands for, but investigators. Usually they have been military, but they're in a civilian capacity.
Okay.
Approached me and demanded that I reveal the nature of the counseling, because this individual, actually, as it turns out, when he got home, he was arrested and charged with a felony. And I said, I cannot do that. And he said,
so back in country, he's pressuring you?
No, this is in Diego.
Oh, Diego,
yeah.
So this military guy or whoever, CIS, is pressuring you as a chaplain to reveal
a confidence.
Okay, and explain to the people what was going through your head and what made you give your answer.
Well, I knew UCMJ rules, and that as a chaplain, I could not be asked to reveal a confidence.
By what authority you could not?
By federal law, by military law.
Okay.
And yet I was threatened with Leavenworth and prosecution, and it didn't make me at all nervous.
Okay.
It annoyed me more than anything. And so I just basically told him, I cannot do that. And he left in a huff. 3 days later, he came and sought me out. He said, "You're right." So, which I knew was the answer.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
So, at Diego Garcia, your rank is what by that time?
I was a major.
A major. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, and then you retired as a lieutenant colonel.
Correct.
Okay. What was it like? Your ministry stateside and your stateside assignment.
Typically just drill weekends and leading worship, doing unit visitation, being available for counseling. That basically, and doing any training that was required.
Did you work with other chaplains, or were you the only one?
No. I had, we had a Catholic priest and 2 other Protestant chaplains.
What was your role, or how did you do it during the floods that we've had in North Dakota?
I only was part of one flood effort because I only spent about 7 years with the North Dakota Air National Guard. So only one flood campaign, but would go out about 12-hour days, and unit visitation was, and then putting on worship services, being available for counseling.
Did you ever throw any sandbags?
No. Those bags were already laid out by the time I was called up.
Yeah, that's a whole story there, all those North Dakota floods for sure. What advice would you have to any new recruit coming into the Air Force or coming into military life, and they say, hey, Chaplain Krogstad, what should I, how should I, what are you going to tell them? What are you going to tell her?
Well, I'd like to know their motivation for joining. typically the primary reason youngsters join is the college benefits, and they are significant. The studies have been done, and a 1 or 2 striper or 3 striper is probably making about $150 an hour when you consider the college benefits. So they're getting far more than even the base commander. It's really a wonderful deal. That being said, I'd like to think that patriotism, a desire to serve, would be somewhere in the mix too. Not just wanting to get the benefits. Like JFK, do not ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That should be there.
I remember during the first Gulf War, my office was being flooded with soldiers. And a young fella said to me, "Chaplain, I didn't sign up for this."
Yeah.
And then I thought, he's not really to be blamed, because the recruiting idea in those days was U.S. Army, great place to start. And it had nothing to do with sacrifice, service, or risk.
No.
So I think a lot of young people can come in, with this as a business arrangement.
Yes.
So break it down. Go farther with that.
Well, and in my own 20 years, the Army logos, be all that you can be. Well, is military service all about you? Or Army of One? What the heck is that all about?
Oh, so you're picking on the Army. So anybody out there, I'll give you Bruce's phone number later. No, I get it. No, and there's this playful banter between the corps, between the branches. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And the Air Force, aim high. Is this really just about furthering your career? Yeah.
Yeah, because you served during war. And there's risk there. And sometimes you're asked to do stuff that, is scary.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you need to be. I know that when I was commissioned, I was prepared that I may not survive this. That was just part of it. That if you're not willing to say, this may claim my life, don't join. Because it's not about college or about
It's
money.
more than that. Yeah. It's more than that.
It's self-sacrifice. It has to be.
What did you learn about yourself? How do you understand yourself now that you've retired? As you're looking in this 20 years of military life, how did it change you, or what is some lessons learned that you learned about yourself?
Well, I think at the age of 40, when I finally came in, who I was as an individual was fairly well defined. So I anticipated deployments as being largely demanding physically, that I had the training required, I had the experience in ministry. I never fooled myself into thinking it was going to be a cakewalk. But, encountering, 2 of my deployments were to Landstuhl. That's where the wounded were brought initially off the battlefield.
And that's in Germany.
In Germany. It's a large Army hospital. And my first tour was right after Fallujah II, which is, the bloodiest battle since, Vietnam. And so encountered a lot of suffering, a lot of banged up.
Meaning you saw these things, you heard these things, you smelled these things.
Yep.
What was it like, for people listening, what was it like seeing that? I remember when I worked on the burn ward and how all that affected me. You're seeing that. Did you ever feel yourself like, I'm not prepared? Mama never told me there would be days like this. They didn't teach this in seminary.
Yeah.
You're shaking your head, yes. So,
yeah. I recognize that to succeed in that context, that if I could accomplish just showing up and being a good listener, because at that time I was a major, and being an officer that was not there to bark, but to listen and to support, that'd be 90% of the success. And obviously I had great admiration for these wounded warriors. I mean, I recognize that physically, many of them would never be the same. And, it is a volunteer military. And so, yeah, I wanted to do that which would be best for them. I would, Lawrenceville is a huge facility. An average day, one would walk probably 10 to 12 miles, just getting around to all the wards. And then in the evening, I'd go back and I'd have easier access to them. They weren't at appointments. So I was assigned the first time to all guard, which would be Air and Army. So like 99% obviously were Army. The Air Force came in with their paper cuts and got their, Bronze Star and their Purple Heart put on them by generals.
Well, and I know, yeah. Let me ask you, your tour of, let's just say at Lawrenceville, because I remember some of the stories you've shared with me when we worked together. And it's now time to get ready to go back to the U.S., time to go back to the old 9 and 5. What's going through your head as you're preparing? What do you have to do emotionally to be able to make that transition back?
Well, it helps that there's out processing, but having deployed prior, I was aware of Germany is very much like the United States. I mean, it's safe. People they look like you. They're not trying to kill you when you go off base. But the mission is so totally different from what I would do as a civilian pastor back home. And so you're kind of going from, running 4,000 RPM, 100 miles an hour, down to, idling in comparison. It made me less patient, I think, coming back. I wasn't... what for somebody who was a bad day or a crisis, I'd go, what? Let me tell you what a bad day. I'll give you an example, Jack. The I-35 bridge collapse. My brother commuted across that daily, and he sent out this email. And that was a terrible event. And compassion sometimes is a victim of deploying into nasty places.
Meaning what?
Well, it's harder. I mean, if somebody comes to you with a sob story, you're thinking, really?
Right in the back of your mind. You're not saying that.
No, you can't say it. And you have to care for them and recognize, it is a big deal for them, and I need to honor that. But kind of deep down, you think,
so that's something that you became aware of, that, wow, you have these, you want to know about suffering, I can tell you about suffering.
Right.
And there's no answers for it. And there's, and do you ever find yourself when you're, maybe listening to somebody and you have this going on in your heart or in your feeling, here back in the States, how do you manage that, Bruce?
You suck it up and drive on, or you don't manage it well. My brother sent out an email with a picture of the collapsed bridge. And again, that was a tragic, people died. And this clearly for him was a huge life event.
Sure it was.
And it would be. It should be. If it weren't, there'd be something wrong with him. And yet I found myself impatient with the woe's me, look what I've been through tone of that email with the picture. So I found a picture of a C5. Which is the Air Force's largest cargo jet. It's proof that barns can fly. And it was... The C5 was filled with caskets. Each with American flags. I hit the send button. Which is not a proud moment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, thanks.
So that kind of experience, seeing those things, being there in real time.
Yep.
I mean, it is. Yeah, I remember back in the day, during the Vietnam days, people say, "When I get back to the world." Well, we can all be living in a 24-hour period, but in different parts of the world, people are experiencing different things. So that's something. So as a minister, you and I have known each other for years. It looks like that's an item that you're addressing or trying to get better at, or whatever.
And I recognize that I would not be a hospital chaplain except for at a VA facility.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think I could endure what for some people are huge issues.
Mm-hmm.
So
something in Bruce Krogstad's story really changed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's fair. I understand that well.
But around vets, there's a common shared experience.
Mm-hmm.
My experience as a chaplain is very different from somebody that was doing jungle patrols and, having to deploy his weapon.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's something that cuts across experiences and even generations and different combat situations that does bind veterans together. It's you recognize that when you deploy and face danger, adversity, you come back and you're really not a part of your community again.
Something's different. So what advice, we're going to begin to, land the plane and put it back in the hangar. What kind of, if there's a veteran listening to us, I hope there are, or someone who knows a veteran, what resources would you direct a veteran to if they needed anything? What comes to your mind?
Well, absolutely the VA.
Mm-hmm.
That the mission of the VA is to care for those that are born in the battle and their widows and orphans.
Mm-hmm.
But for some, especially our Vietnam vet brothers and
mm-hmm.
sisters,
mm-hmm.
The government, they feel, and I think rightly, did not treat them very well.
Right.
It took 2 decades before Agent Orange was admitted to be detrimental to health. PTSD wasn't recognized
mm-hmm.
for 2 decades,
mm-hmm.
nearly after Vietnam ended.
Mm-hmm.
And for that reason, vet centers were established. So if anyone has any hesitancy about walking into a big VA hospital, go to a vet center.
Mm-hmm.
The records cannot be accessed by the government. It's really as confidential as
mm-hmm.
as seeing a chaplain.
And it's usually to find some kind of connection to the larger. They're a separate entity, but they are connected. In a business sense. What are some? So the VA vet centers. What other kinds of advice, or if someone's coming to you and say, "Hey, I need somebody to turn to talk to," or and it's not always about a crisis. Maybe it's somebody's sister who she looks at her brother now, or she looks at her sister now, and something's not different. What about the family member? What would you tell a family member?
I think that's probably the one area where the least has been done. And certainly spouses and children have been impacted deeply, especially for anyone that's suffered physical or spiritual wounds,
mm-hmm.
PTSD, moral injury.
Mm-hmm.
Their lives have been changed. The spouse that came back from war is a different spouse.
So I'm not talking about the service member. What would you say to a spouse of a service member, and they're living this out? What word of encouragement or what resource would you direct them to?
If you're active duty, there are undoubtedly resources at your base. The difficult thing is for reservists, because no one in our neighborhood is military or prior military.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Kathy felt very isolated. No one really understood what she was going through. They were kind, they wanted to help, but they did not know what it was like to have your spouse gone. I would say seek out other, in the case of a spouse, seek out other spouses. The Vet Center has support groups for the spouses of individuals that have suffered PTSD, for example. I think those support groups can be very valuable.
Yeah, I know. I've been to the Vet Center for counseling. I've been treated by the VA, and I'm a very pro-VA guy. I said on another broadcast we did, you're never going to find me throwing the VA under the bus. No system is perfect, and I've been treated in the civilian sector as well, and I've had a positive experience, and so I would say at least give them a chance.
Yep.
And I would add this: give them a second chance.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time. Is there anything because you retired out of the Air National Guard recently? What are some of the things you miss about being in service or wearing the uniform?
I'd say especially for those that I've deployed with, there's a connection with those individuals that I will never replicate in any friendship or community. Working together for a common purpose with people of very different disciplines. Just to get, in our case, 6 C-130s up and running with all the gear we needed. We deployed with extreme cold weather gear in May, it's a massive endeavor, and we accomplished great things in doing that mission. So it does bind you together as a cohesive team. I mean, they do become your brothers and sisters. There's no other family around.
Well, and these shared experiences that are off the grid of everybody back home. What are some things that you're glad to have left behind in the military?
Well, PT.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not having to
weight control standards.
Yeah.
Right.
For a better or for worse.
Exactly. Yeah.
Even though I was on the volunteer list for 17 years, and I'd go again in a heartbeat. There is a relief not having to do it again. So I'm retired. Even if I wanted to, I could not do it again. And, at 61, I'm content to not do it.
Well, I'm very proud of you, Bruce, because I knew you before you went in. I knew you during your tour, your 21 years, and I knew you after it all. And you've had a complete experience, and I really appreciate your honesty of how it's changed you, and how it impacts the marriage and the relationship. There's so many more questions I would like to ask. What is something you want to say to us that I did not ask you about? Anything come to mind at all?
I'd say in terms of spirituality, the notion, many people would say God died for me in the jungles of Vietnam, or whatever their experience was. And I get that. I can perfectly see how that can happen.
What does that mean? Before we...
that because of individuals experiencing horrible things.
Okay.
The question is, how can there be a good, loving, all-powerful deity?
So the idea of God or the supernatural or a loving being, all that stuff died for me.
Right.
Okay, keep going.
And yet, for me, even though there are many times, like doing air evac for one of my tours, seeing these guys right off the battlefield, and you do see the horrors of war. For me, the only thing or the primary thing that kept me going was faith. Knowing that God was there for me. That's what got me up the next morning. I mean, otherwise you'd say, this is all nonsense, and give up in despair.
Did you have a favorite scripture that you would lean on a lot?
My God, why hast thou forsaken me?
Ah, yes. Yeah.
The Gospel of Mark.
Yeah.
Those were Jesus' last words from the cross. They're spoken out of faith. It's a prayer to God.
Right.
It's not like he stopped believing, but he sure called, God into question.
Well, and just one of the things it gives, I think, and I remember counseling for a long time. People feel like if you have any doubt, you're sinning and it's wrong.
Yep.
So break that down. We're almost starting another podcast here. We're not going to do that because we just don't have the time. But someone sitting in front of you, they say, this no longer makes sense to me. But they're sitting there talking to you as a representative of God Almighty.
Right.
How do you handle that kind of stuff?
I don't try to talk them out of it. I don't try to make theological arguments for the existence of evil. Now, if they ask me how I square that away, I'll gladly tell them. But I believe that just wearing the uniform, you always have the cross on. As a VA chaplain, they know that I'm a pastor. So I'd like to think that my willingness to listen, to withhold any judgment, and to have as great a respect for them before they offer that confession, that how could I believe in God, given what I've gone through? Just allowing them that holy and sacred space, and caring for them and loving them despite it.
When people would pose that to me, I would ask myself a question. Because sometimes people are asking questions, they're not really looking for an answer because they're not ready yet.
Right.
And I just sit here and say, is a theological response really what they need, or do they need something else? And that would be a loving pastoral touch.
Right.
Yeah. Boy, you just opened up a can of worms. I could go forever on that. We'll have you back. Maybe we'll talk about moral injury, PTSD, and spiritual problems. How does PTSD and moral injury look like in the whole idea of combat or war or conflict, stuff like that? Bruce, it has just been a blast having you here.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, and so you've been retired for
about a year.
Yeah. Well, great. And you're a church still?
Yep.
Okay.
Little church halftime at the VA.
Yeah, and we're going to interview your wife, Kathy, next. So hopefully if you have time to listen on that next podcast, Jack, you can tell them about it, however you do that. But before we go, Bruce, would you say a prayer for anybody that would be listening?
Okay. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have called men and women, sometimes boys and girls, to serve their country. We know that not every time that people have gone to war on behalf of the United States has it necessarily been an event of your will, but that doesn't change your love and your support for those that have worn the uniform one bit. We thank you for your unconditional love, that you care for us, you forgive us, no matter what we've said and done. There's nothing we can do that can separate us from your love, as you've told us. We also thank you for the fact that you know what it's like to serve. You know what it's like to give your life for others, because you did through what your Son Jesus Christ did on the cross. But we also know that death did not have the final word, but the resurrection and life did. And so we thank you for not just life eternal, but the opportunities for life to occur and reoccur in the lives of our veterans that sometimes live and experience only the valley of the shadow of death. And for those individuals, we pray that you would give them the opportunity to rediscover that there is life, not just in the hereafter, but right here, right now, through places like the vet center and counselors and psychologists that deeply care and can do some marvelous healing. But we know that ultimately you're the great physician, and so we thank you for you being the author of the ultimate healing, as we commend all those who have served and into your care. Amen.
Amen. Well, Bruce, thank you.